way back in like 2,600 years ago, maybe even 2,800 years ago, Aristotle lived, and he wrote a book 800 years ago called The Art of Rhetoric, or he actually just called it Rhetoric. And it was about how it was people could develop credibility. This is really interesting that people have been writing about this for thousands of years. It's not a new concept. Maybe it's just that we as human beings need to hear the same thing over and over again before we really let it sink in. And Aristotle, in this book that he wrote called Rhetoric, he talked about rhetoric, or being credible as a communicator, was ultimately about three things. He said there was three things that leads to credibility. Hey everybody, welcome back to this next episode where we've been talking about creating healthy workplace culture. And, you know, creating healthy workplace culture is a little bit like baking, some beautiful bread or making a beautiful pot of stew, where it's not just one ingredient that's needed, but you actually need to put together several ingredients, because culture is a very interesting thing. It's a little bit intangible, isn't it? Culture. People say, well, what's the culture of your workplace? And, you know, we may have a hard time defining good culture or healthy culture, but we have no issue defining bad culture. We know that toxic workplace culture hurts people. We know that toxic workplace culture demeans people. We know that toxic workplace culture demeans people and it degrades people. It disempowers people. But healthy workplace culture leaves people feeling energized, leaves people feeling positive, leaves people feeling productive, and frankly, brings a lot more profit to the organization. So we've been talking about how it is that we can create healthy workplace culture. And we've been talking about 10 traits of people who create a flourishing or a healthy workplace culture. And I'd like to go ahead and give you the 8th trait. For all of the 7 that have preceded this, I would encourage you to check out our previous episodes. And we've kind of done a clinic on these 10 traits so far. But the 8th trait is moral directedness and integrity. That's what we want to focus on here today. Now, that's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? Moral directedness and integrity. It sounds so fancy, it sounds so sophisticated. But you know what? As we kind of think about this, I want you to ponder with me for a moment what kind of impact integrity actually has on the culture of a team, right? So I don't know if you've ever been on a team where, you know, maybe it's just a small team. Could be a sports team, could be a workplace team, could be a team of people, close friends. And, you know, everybody kind of trusts each other and everybody feels comfortable around each other. But maybe there's one person on that team who doesn't always tell the truth. Maybe there's one person on that team who's not always honest. Maybe there's one person on that team who's always inauthentic. And even if you think, well, we can survive with that person, and it's true, you can, that person is actually typically a drag on culture. But when everyone on that team is honest and has integrity, that elevates a healthy workplace culture. Now, how do we know this? Well, I mentioned several episodes ago that Google, back in 2017, you know, they've got hundreds of thousands of employees around the world, multi-billion-dollar organization in over 100 countries. And in 2017, they decided to study their organization to tease out the highest performing teams. And what they found is that the highest performing teams, the number 2 trait of high performing teams was dependability. In other words, if I'm here and you're there, we can depend on each other. When I don't have a dependable teammate, if I don't have a teammate who has integrity, what it actually does is it creates a less effective, less efficient, more toxic workplace culture. You see, flourishing workplaces are focused on workplaces where everybody is operating off a playbook called integrity. No matter what sort of business you operate, no matter what sort of nonprofit, whether you work for government or you are a solopreneur, every organization survives and thrives based on integrity. As a matter of fact, Cornell University professor Tony Simons, in his research on behavioral integrity, found that organizations where employees strongly believe that their managers will follow through on their promises and demonstrate the values that they preach are way more profitable than those where managers are not following through and practicing what they preach. So what that actually shows us is that there's a business case for this. Now this is really interesting. I came across a book a while ago, and I just love the book. I'd encourage you to pick it up if you can. It's called Return on Character by an author by the name of Fred Keel. And it's printed by Harvard University Press. And this, Return on Character book by Fred Keel actually was the first major study to show a measurable relationship between the character of the CEO and the success of the company. And what they actually found, without getting you into all of the nuances of the data, is that when the CEO of the organization had a high level of character, a high level of integrity, the company was much more profitable than when the CEO doesn't have that high level of integrity and that high level of character. Now, you might say, well, why is that? And what does that have to do with creating healthy workplace culture? Well, here's the thing, friends. Nothing positive or transformational happens until people feel safe. And when people feel safe, what happens is they're able to unlock the best of their brain. All the most sophisticated parts of their brain come out. All of the creative, all of the innovative juices are firing on all cylinders. But when they are lacking, of course, the best of their brain, because they don't feel safe, what ends up happening is they actually don't give the very best of themselves because they're in a protective posture. Now, this has been known for literally thousands of years. Way back in 2,600 years ago, maybe even 2,800 years ago, Aristotle lived, and he wrote a book 800 years ago called The Art of Rhetoric, or he actually just called it Rhetoric. And it was about how it was people could develop credibility. This is really interesting that people have been writing about this for thousands of years. It's not a new concept. Maybe it's just that we as human beings need to hear the same thing over and over again before we really let it sink in. And Aristotle, in this book that he wrote called Rhetoric, he talked about rhetoric, or being credible as a communicator, was ultimately about three things. He said there was three things that leads to credibility. The first he called logos. And that's a Greek word because, of course, Aristotle was Greek, and logos stands for logic. Okay, so if I want to be credible, I need to be logical. The second thing he said would lead to credibility was pathos. And pathos was emotion. So if I'm going to be credible, I don't just need to be logical, but I also need to have some emotion. People need to know that I'm not just a robot, that I'm not some AI-generated, 3D printed, produced thing, but I'm an actual human being with emotions and vulnerability. The third thing, though, he said was critical for developing credibility was what he called ethos. Now, ethos you might call ethics, but a better term or a better way of describing ethos would be lived experience. In other words, the more credible a leader was, had to do with their lived experience. Were they just preaching what they preached, or were they practicing what they preach? You can talk the talk, but are you walking the walk? And so I know a lot of the time we think ethics as being some sort of thing where some ethics board is trying to impose on us a set of standards, but really that's not where it comes from. The word ethics is, does your lived experience show that you practice what you preach? Not necessarily that you're always perfect, because who among us is? But are you operating from that ethical place of not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk? And this is really, really interesting, because no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what culture you're raised in, you see, character and integrity is the most multicultural value ever. You know what? I've traveled the whole world, and I have yet to find a culture where it's okay to lie or cheat or scam or steal. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like it's funny because you and I might have different skin colors, different hair colors, different languages, even different religions, but there is a core set of moral values that it takes just to be a human being. And somehow there are some leaders who think that they can get away from that And then they wonder, well, how come I don't have a healthy workplace culture? Well, the good news is if that's you and you've made mistakes, and who hasn't, I'll tell you what, we can begin to shift that right away. How do you begin to shift that? Well, you might need to make some apologies. You might need to say to some people, hey, you know what? I wasn't honest. I blew it. I'm sorry. How many think that sometimes sorry is the very best thing that we can do? Just an honest, sincere apology. But sorry is not enough. Apologies are step one. But the next step is then to begin to change, right? To operate from the highest level of integrity. I often talk about the fact, I have customers who have worked with me for over a decade. I mean, I can't tell you what that means because I'm not like Walmart. It's not like they keep coming back because I sell their hand lotion, their hand moisturizer. They keep coming back, especially when you're a trainer and a speaker and a coach. Why would you keep coming back to somebody over a decade? Because they have integrity. Doesn't mean I'm perfect. But what it means is that they've been with me enough to know that there's a level of credibility that's there, that I'm not perfect, but I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to operate according to how I say. And, hey, I do blow it sometimes. And so what do I got to do? Hey, look, I'm sorry. I'll work on that. Would you be willing to help me get better? And I'll tell you, I think that's a two-way relationship. When you ask for grace, you should also extend it. And that's interesting. Remember how I told you this, Frank Keel had done this first ever study on the impact of character and profit in CEOs. This was the guy from Harvard. You know what he discovered? He discovered that one of the elements of character was compassion, and it was forgiveness. And so what that tells us is that if I'm going to have character, it's not just, oh, I have integrity and I'm this moral paragon of virtue. Yeah, okay, let's be moral, let's be honest, but it's also, are you able to forgive? People need that from you. A healthy workplace culture is not a workplace culture where we cancel people. The moment they make a mistake, we throw them outside the community, we throw them under the bus. A healthy workplace culture is one where we can say, I'm sorry, where we can own up to mistakes, where we can have actual adult conversations of understanding. What led you to do that? How can we all improve so that we don't create the conditions where we're making mistakes over and over again, but where we can learn from our mistakes, we can change, and we can grow. And so I hope this has been helpful for you here today. We're talking about traits that create healthy workplace culture. And today we've talked in this episode about moral directedness and integrity. It's not that hard. It's just something that we have to lean in and apply each and every day. And so here at Flourishing Workplace, we believe in workplaces where everyone belongs, everyone contributes, and everyone, I mean from the bottom to the top, absolutely can completely thrive. And if you're confused or you're wondering, how do I create a workplace like that? Please do go to flourishingworkplace.com, hop on a discovery call, book a discovery call at no cost right away, and we will work with you to create a detailed roadmap. And not only will we give you the roadmap, but we will walk with you to implement it. That's flourishingworkplace.com. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.